Night was falling over medieval France, and the people of the south had no idea that their world was about to be wiped away. In a storm of fire and steel, what began as a conflict over belief would soon collapse into one of the most horrifying massacres Europe had ever witnessed. Armies claiming to fight for God marched with righteous fury, convinced they were cleansing the land of evil. But what happens when faith becomes a weapon and a whole city becomes a target? This is the story of a place that refused to bend, a people caught between power and punishment, and a crusade launched not against foreign enemies but against Christians themselves. In this tragedy, fear and devotion collided. Leaders made choices soaked in blood, and thousands of innocent lives were swept away in a single day. The church saw danger. The nobles smelled opportunity. The soldiers wanted redemption. And Béziers paid the price. Tonight, we go inside the moment when the difference between believer and heretic vanished beneath flame and rubble. Inside the night when mercy drowned and cruelty ruled. Inside the event that shattered a region and left a stain on history that still burns. In the summer of 1209, the great fortress city of Béziers stood at the heart of southern France, unaware that it was about to become the site of a catastrophe no one would ever forget. An enormous army approached, claiming they marched under God's authority, yet prepared to destroy everyone inside the walls, old or young, believer or heretic. Their rage was aimed at the Cathars, a group whose teachings threatened the Catholic Church's dominance. These good Christians, as they called themselves, rejected the wealth of the clergy, questioned church authority, and preached a strict divide between good and evil. For the church, they were not just wrong, they were dangerous. 1 year earlier, Pope Innocent III had declared a crusade not in distant lands, but right here in France, ordering the elimination of this growing movement. Thousands of nobles, fighters, and fanatics gathered to carry out his command. Béziers, known for sheltering many Cathars yet also filled with faithful Catholics, suddenly stood in the path of a holy war. Leading the Crusaders was the papal representative Arnaud Amalric, who demanded the city surrender anyone labeled a heretic. The people refused. What followed would echo through time. As the Crusaders surrounded Béziers, a simple question spread among them. How would they tell heretic from loyal Christian? Once the fighting began, Amalric supposedly gave a chilling reply. Kill them all. God will know his own, whether he truly spoke these words or not. Chroniclers close to the events recorded the phrase, and the army acted as though it was an order carved in stone. On the morning the assault began, the Crusaders believed they faced a lengthy siege. The city was strong, its walls high, its citizens determined to resist. Inside Béziers, tensions ran high. There were merchants, craftsmen, priests, Catholics who trusted their faith would protect them, and Cathars who refused to betray their beliefs. But the fate of the city would not be decided by siege tactics or grand strategy. It would be decided by a single impulsive act. A handful of young men from Béziers burst out of a side gate and attacked a group of Crusader scouts. Perhaps they were angry, perhaps they were confident, but that reckless strike lit the spark that doomed them all. The skirmish spread like wildfire. The Crusader army, sensing weakness or chaos, surged forward. Shouts rose through the camp as fighters rushed toward the walls, seizing the unexpected chance to attack. The city guard, caught off balance and unable to close the gate in time, failed to hold the breach. What should have been a fortified defense collapsed in minutes. The Crusaders poured in without siege engines, without ladders, without a plan. Amoric later wrote to the Pope that his forces entered the city without waiting for orders, driven by sudden fury. Once inside, discipline shattered. The crusade that had been declared to eliminate heresy instantly transformed into uncontrolled killing. No one tried to separate Cathar from Catholic. No one checked who resisted and who begged for peace. Men were cut down in the streets. Children cried out and were struck down. Women fled, only to be hunted through their own homes. The narrow lanes of Béziers filled with bodies as the soldiers looted whatever they could carry. Amoric later boasted that 20,000 people were killed. Though the true number was likely lower, yet even the most cautious estimates still describe a slaughter beyond anything Europe expected. As blood spilled through the streets, Béziers' holy places, once symbols of peace, became scenes of terror. Many residents fled into the church of Saint Mary Magdalene, believing no warrior would dare harm them within God's house. The church had offered sanctuary for generations, but on this day, nothing sacred remained. Chroniclers report that the Crusaders set the building on fire while hundreds were trapped inside. Flames raced up wooden beams, smoke filled the vaulted ceilings, and the screams of families echoed long after the doors collapsed. Those inside were not only Cathars, they were Catholics, priests, children, and the elderly, all burned together. Other religious buildings across the city suffered the same fate. Monasteries and chapels were broken open and robbed. Relics, chalices, and manuscripts that had survived centuries were smashed or stolen. Monks suspected of sympathy toward the Cathars were killed, while many who had no connection at all died simply because no one bothered to ask. The crusade, declared holy by the Pope, revealed its true nature in Béziers. Nothing was too sacred to destroy. Amoric expressed no regret. To him, the burning city was proof of God's favor. But to those who survived, it showed the terrifying power of blind belief. As the day ended, Béziers was no longer a living city. Homes that had once housed families were reduced to rubble. The streets were littered with bodies. Smoke rose in thick columns as fire swallowed entire neighborhoods. Survivors who had escaped before the assault or hidden in the countryside crept back at nightfall, only to find their homes gone. The Crusaders, satisfied with their victory, turned to the next phase, complete destruction. Fires were intentionally set across the city to erase it from existence. Stone cracked in the intense heat. Wooden structures crumbled into ash, and even grand churches collapsed as flames devoured them. Amoric himself wrote that the city had been plundered and burned. Béziers, once one of the brightest cities in Languedoc, now lay silent and empty. The destruction served a purpose. It was meant to terrify every other town in the region. It worked. When the crusading army left the ruins of Béziers behind, the horror of what happened spread across the entire region faster than any soldier could march. Word of the massacre reached nearby cities, within days stories of streets filled with bodies, churches burned with families inside, and an entire population wiped out in a single afternoon. The message was unmistakable. Resisting the crusade meant total destruction. Towns like Carcassonne listened, watched, and understood what was coming. Fear gripped their people. Leaders who had once planned to defend their walls now hesitated, terrified that their city might become the next smoldering graveyard. Many surrendered without even drawing a sword, hoping to avoid the fate that had swallowed Béziers. The fall of Béziers changed the entire course of the Albigensian Crusade. What had begun as a mission to root out heresy quickly became a brutal campaign, built on intimidation. The Crusaders no longer needed long sieges or negotiations. The ruins of Béziers did the talking for them. Everywhere the army marched, its presence carried the weight of that one terrible day. The lines separating justice, punishment, and pure vengeance seemed to vanish. To the church, Béziers proved their power. To the people of Languedoc, it proved that mercy had no place in this crusade. And as the army continued through the south, the silent ashes of Béziers followed them like a shadow, shaping every choice, every surrender, and every future act of violence in the war that had only just begun. The destruction of Béziers was so overwhelming that even people living far from the cities struggled to understand how such cruelty could happen in a single day. Reports traveled through villages, carried by traders, monks, and terrified survivors. Some said the Crusaders left no street untouched. Others described flames rising higher than the rooftops, turning the entire sky black with smoke. Even chroniclers loyal to the church could not ignore the scale of the slaughter. They recorded townspeople fleeing with children in their arms, only to be overtaken by soldiers who no longer cared who was guilty or innocent. In every account, one truth remained. Béziers had not simply been defeated, it had been erased. Caesar Ius of Heisterbach, writing soon after the events, preserved words that would haunt history. Arnaud Amalric's supposed command, "Kill them all." God will know his own, whether he spoke these exact words or not. They perfectly reflected the savagery unleashed that day. The massacre did not only wipe out a community, it revealed how faith, when twisted by fear and power, can become more destructive than any weapon. It showed how leaders, claiming to defend purity, could justify acts that shattered every moral rule. Cathars, who hoped only to live according to their beliefs, were swept away. But alongside them died countless Catholics, merchants, clergy, and families who had no connection to the movement at all. Béziers' ruins became a symbol of what happens when violence replaces judgment, and when suspicion becomes a death sentence. Long after the fires died, people across Europe repeated the story as a warning, a reminder that the greatest horrors are often carried out not by foreign enemies, but by those who insist they act in God's name. When the last flames finally dimmed and the smoke drifted into the night sky, Béziers was nothing more than a blackened skeleton of what it had once been. Streets that had echoed with merchants' calls and children's laughter were now silent. Stones were scorched, rooftops collapsed, and the smell of ash clung to the air for days. The city that had survived centuries of trade, culture, and faith was now empty, its people gone, its memories buried beneath layers of soot and ruin. The crusading army marched away satisfied, leaving behind only devastation and a message written in fire. But while the soldiers continued onward, the story of Béziers did not fade. Instead, it spread like a cold wind through southern France. Villagers whispered about the horror. Priests spoke of the city as an example of divine judgment or as a tragedy born from human cruelty. Depending on who told the tale, families in distant towns lit candles for loved ones who might have been inside the walls. Every burned brick and shattered altar became a symbol of what unchecked power could do. The massacre of Béziers became more than a single event. It became a turning point, showing that the crusade would show no mercy, no matter a person's faith or innocence. Thousands had died not because of what they believed, but because the line between heretic and Christian had vanished in the heat of fanaticism. And then came the quote that history refused to forget. Caesarius of Heisterbach wrote down Arnaud or Mauric's supposed words, "Kill them all. God will know his own," even if those words were never spoken. They captured the heart of what happened: blind violence carried out in the name of righteousness. Béziers became the warning carved into the conscience of Europe. When people looked at the ruins, they did not just see a destroyed city. They saw the cost of fear, ambition, and faith twisted into a weapon. They saw proof that cruelty can hide itself behind holy banners. Long after the fires went cold, Béziers remained a silent witness, reminding all who heard its story that history remembers, especially when mercy does not.